You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Chapter 19. Natasha's News. After a few more minutes had passed, Mark's mind gradually reunited itself with reality. If he was dead, he felt aware that it was not unpleasant, not the way it was a short while ago. He became aware of a warmth filling his body, just as if he had been frozen solid and was now experiencing a thawing-out sensation. He couldn't look again at the blinding vision which haunted him, which had relentlessly hunted him down. Dare he look? He was now in a state of quiet terror at what he would see if he dared to open his eyes. Like a child on its birthday, desperately longing not to be disappointed at the present it would see on opening its eyes, yet open they must. The moment was there. His confidence had grown tenfold in all but a few moments. He had to know what lay on the other side of his eyelids, which were now blanking out reality. The light was blinding just as he had feared. He screamed a bitter scream until his voice could no longer make audible the horror he felt. The voice came again. Where had it gone, to now return to trick him? His face twisted into a grotesque mask of hatred and disbelief, cursing what he thought and heard. "Where is reality? Where are you? Who are you to use me in this vile manner?" He spat out the words as if to remove them from his racked body. The voice returned. "Reality is here with us. Just open your eyes. Everything is fine. You will be happy when you look and see for yourself." Should he do as the voice said? Perhaps it was tricking him again as he had been tricked all along. He was aware of a gentle pressure on his tightly shut eyelids, quivering as the muscles weakened. He again felt a warmth, one which he felt sure this time he should trust. He allowed the warm pressure to gradually open his upper lids. He tried to make sense of what he partly saw. With his lids half raised, partly against his will, Mark suddenly took courage and fully opened both of his eyes. He stared at what he first could make out. It was familiar to him. He remembered the walls and the picture hung upon it. Jane raised his head slightly and placed a pillow behind it. She walked to the front of the bed where he could see her. He looked and stared in utter disbelief, but at the same time began to realize he was back in the hotel room and that he was alive. Mark cried for a long time, with Jane and the doctor comforting him. He was finally released from a frighteningly abhorrent nightmare. Worse than that, much worse. He had returned from a point his mind had reached, which by all accounts should have taken his life. He had perhaps died a little during his terrifying experience. He had been there before. During Mark's convalescence, he gradually came to terms with the distinction between what he thought had happened and what had actually happened. He was told of being discovered after a very long search, a search which was undertaken by Jane and a few good hotel neighbors for most of that night. It was sheer luck he was found before he died of hypothermia. It appeared he had slipped and hit his head on the root of a tree he was found next to, and this had caused him to fall into a partially water-filled ditch running beside it. When found, he was talking gibberish. His coherent words had only existed in his concussed, confused, and worried mind. He had lived out his fears and terrors in the most violent of nightmares. The doctor said that in his experience Mark had suffered because of overwork, and most likely the weird dreams and hallucinations he had given such a vivid account of were his mind's way of trying to unravel a series of events he had lived through in the real world, but translated into a horrific fantasy world which presented no solution to the problem either. A deadlock. Mark tried as best he could to recall the events he remembered as the doctor continued to explain his personal theory as to what might have caused Mark's condition. He reasoned that since the problem was unresolvable, he had tried to hang on to the last shred of reality represented by the tree, which itself allowed no solution, and so changed gradually into the vision of an atomic bomb, this being the ultimate image of destruction, including his own, hence Mark's embrace of it. According to the doctor, this solved all problems rather like suicide in the awake, unbalanced person. The doctor was not told anything. He was just left to make up his own mind as to what to make of Mark's nightmare. He had no inkling as to how near the truth the images actually represented. It was far too complicated. Before the doctor left, he remarked on how common it was for people to go to pieces dwelling on thoughts of nuclear explosions in the troubled world as it was at the moment. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since Mark's dreadful experience, and both Jane and old Mrs. Palmer saw to it that he didn't worry about anything. He couldn't help himself thinking that the bomb was not removed and that, in fact, it had detonated. Don't you think that if it had blown up, it would have been world news headlines by now? Do try to be sensible, Mark. We've all worked hard. Don't crack now, please, implored Jane, pouring him and herself another coffee. I can't imagine how it happened. Not the fall. I mean, all the weird, surreal images of the people I love and those I hate, as if it was real. There's no memory of tripping and falling, just an evening walk, right from leaving the house to the misty darkness. Then there were people. They were everywhere, truly. Surely I can't have just dreamt it all, he said in despair. Try to stop thinking about it, Mark. It's the only way to stay sane. We may hear from Edward soon. Then you will believe that. Jane tried to assure him that what he dreamt or hallucinated wasn't reality, although at the time it had seemed that way. Mark smiled in resignation. Jane just had to be right. Sure enough, the next day felt wonderful. Mrs. Palmer popped up to their room to say a Dr. Edward Rayner was on the phone wanting to speak to Mark. It was just past 9 in the morning, and he was half asleep. Nevertheless, Mark leapt uneasily out of the bed and staggered across the room and down the stairs. The phone was left for him, hanging down, bobbing up and down from the dial box by its black coiled wire. Mark grabbed it. "Hello, yes, Edward?" he said excitedly. "Okay, this is the message I received a few minutes ago, Mark. Shall I go ahead and read it over the phone, or do you want to meet us?" "I'm sure it's all right to speak here. There's no switchboard, just the one phone here in the hallway, far away," said Mark, hardly able to contain himself. Natasha said the following. "All is done abroad," we spoke of. "No problems or casualties. Visit me soon at the hospital." Did you get that? "You know what it means, I hope," added Edward. "I sure do. It's terrific news," enthused Mark. "Well, thank goodness for that. I'm sure you'll tell me what it's all about in your own good time." "Of course I will, Edward. It was just better not to tell anyone for the time being. You'll understand when I tell you. You won't believe it. Many thanks to you, Edward. A true friend. Take care of yourself and that lovely wife of yours." "Ha ha! The same goes for you and the lovely Jane. I'll be seeing you," said Edward, and then hung up. Mark made it up the stairs in 3. "Jane, it's done. It's really done. The bomb's gone. Right from under their noses at the Krim. Isn't that fantastic news?" Jane flung her arms around him. They could now start their lives afresh. "One thing," remarked Jane cryptically. "What's that? Now, no tricks or surprises. Promise?" "It's just that I don't know what will become of Natasha. We must go and see her as soon as we can, right?" "Right," agreed Mark. "I think she's still in danger." For what she and her colleagues have done, she ought to get a bloody medal, don't you think? Jane remained thoughtful for a few moments. Look, would there be any reason why she couldn't come over to England? Back with us, I mean? Jane looked serious. I don't really know, admitted Mark, rather taken aback at the suggestion. I think she would have to have a work permit. I'll have to find out. You're serious about her, aren't you? I agree with you. It's the least we could do to ask her, anyway. We'll have to see. Mark gave her an enormous hug and lifted her off the floor. Later that day, they paid Natasha a visit at the hospital with the excuse to Dr. Freeman that they had written out some questions in Russian to see if that would help with obtaining at least a few bits of information for their written report. Jane already had the bullet entry diagrams filled in from the previous visit. They met in the hospital's secure garden. It was wonderful, with everyone in guarded high spirits. Both of them congratulated her in hushed tones for the important telephone call she made and later received. She told them she would soon be well enough to leave the hospital, and it was then that Mark told her of their offer. I'm overwhelmed by your kind generosity. I don't know what to say, she replied. Simple, said a beaming Mark. Say yes. Jane caught her attention and gently held up her chin. Natasha, you are a young and beautiful woman. If you wanted to, you could come find a loving man and settle down. In England, London, and particularly Cambridge, which we have come to love, you would always be happy. The job prospects for your experience are just there waiting for you, particularly in the universities, and I have many friends. I reckon that within a month I could help you find a good job. You've become important to us. Please think it over carefully. We will return to England tomorrow, Natasha, and I want your promise that you'll keep in regular touch with us and will let us know of your decision. If you need any sort of references, anything, don't hesitate to call us, okay? Promise? Ordered Mark. I promise. You both have been so kind. Mark wrote out the addresses she would need to contact either one of them at work or at home, together with a great list of telephone numbers which Mark reeled off like he was a teleprompter, much to Natasha's amazement. She smiled to herself and then to Jane. They both left after kissing Natasha farewell, she wishing them the safest journeys back to England. Back inside, Mark asked the guards to direct them to Dr. Freeman's office, where they told him of their partial success in gaining some more details for their survey. Mark explained that he had been unwell since their first visit, and that this interview had taken up all their remaining time, preventing them conducting further interviews before they had to return to England. That same day, arrangements were made for the return flight to England. They left Mrs. Palmer at the gate of her hotel after packing the hire car. Since they were flying home the following morning, they booked into a pleasant-looking B&B near the airport for the night. Mark and Jane spoke to Edward and Helen on the phone, thanking them for all they had done, and invited them to Mark's Hampstead home whenever they could make it. It was then Mark teased that he would tell them both the saga of their summer house project. When they arrived at JFK Airport, Jane headed for the restaurant for some food while Mark paid off the hire car. 20 minutes later, he joined the queue for meals when their flight was called over the PA. All thoughts of food left his mind or stomach as he vaulted the guardrail and made towards Jane. Now it was back to England, to Cambridge, and a return to sanity. What would he say to his friends and colleagues back at Addenbrooke's? He could not imagine. Hopefully he had a job and a flat to return to, but all that really mattered was that he and Jane could at least enjoy one another in private peace and quiet and plan their future together. Many hours later, their plane touched down with a squeal of tires at Heathrow. They had little money left between them by now, but just enough to rent another B&B for the night and to hire a taxi back to the big house later the next day.